Hi, welcome to Conversation with Alanis Morissette. Our guests today are doctors John and Julie Gottman. I've been looking forward to speaking with them both for a very long time. John is world-renowned for his work on marital stability and divorce prediction and has conducted 50 years of breakthrough research with thousands of couples. His work on marriage and parenting has earned him numerous major awards, including the American Family Therapy Academy for Most Distinguished Contributor to Family Systems Research, 4 National Institute of Mental Health Research Scientist Awards, the National Council of Family Relations. He won the Burgess Award for Outstanding Career in Theory and Research, among many others. Dr. Gottman was one of the top 10 most influential therapists of the past quarter century, named this by the Psychotherapy Networker. He is the author or co-author of over 200 published academic articles and more than 40 books, including the best-selling The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, What Makes Love Last, 8 Dates, Essential Conversations for a Lifetime of Love, The Relationship Cure, Why Marriages Succeed or Fail, and Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, among many others. Dr. Julie Schwartz Gottman is co-founder and president of the Gottman Institute and co-founder of Effective Software Incorporated with her husband, John Gottman. A highly respected clinical psychologist, she is sought internationally by media and organizations as an expert advisor on marriage, sexual harassment and rape, domestic violence, gay and lesbian adoption, same-sex marriage, and parenting issues. She's the co-creator of the immensely popular The Art and Science of Love weekend workshops for couples. And she also co-designed the National Clinical Training Program in Gottman Method Couples Therapy. Inspiring, empowering, respectful, and kind, Julie's leadership of the Institute has made it possible to identify and integrate the expertise of her staff, therapists, and the wider research and therapeutic community. A lot of the Gottman's books are written together, as well as Julie Gottman just releasing a book entitled Fight Right. It is with great joy and anticipation that I welcome them to the show today. I'm just going to, on a personal level, start by expressing how happy I am to have you both on conversation with us today, because I have had the pleasure and honor and privilege of interviewing a lot of your colleagues and your peers. And I was in some ways saving you, the magical Gottman interview, saving it. And then I sort of disappeared into postpartum, I call it postpartum activity. And we moved. And so now the podcast is up on its feet again. And you were the first 2 people in my life who I was immediately wanting to speak with. So I feel really happy that this is happening.
Oh, you are so kind.
We're honored to be with you.
Absolutely.
And also, I just, on a personal note, I want to thank you, John. There was one moment at UCLA where I was doing some talks with Dan Siegel for the neurobiology conference. And one of the days, it was a few years in a row, one of the days I came as a student because archetypally it's one of my favorites. And there was a moment where people were gathering to jump on stage to do a panel. And you turned to me and you said, "Get up there." And I said, "But I didn't speak today. It might not be relevant." And you said, "Get up there." And I was really moved by that for many reasons, one of which is because it's a whole psychotherapeutic world that I'd always been involved in and had my feet in all the way up to my neck. But in some ways it was sort of hidden in a way, because in the 90s with music in the entertainment industry, if you were to dare be multitudinous and be more than just a rock and roll performer or an on-weed artist of some kind, which I was very much not on weed, it was career suicide in a way. So for me to have all these multitudinous, multiple intelligence cooking at the same time, it was a big no-no in the 90s. So I had to pretend to cut off big pieces of myself to apparently keep my career going, even though it was a total illusion. But entering into very formally from the time that I think I read Keeping the Love You Find by your colleague and friend Harville Hendrix at 15 years old. And just in terms of survival strategy as a child, my approach was very much to understand the human condition so that I could somehow manipulate it to get the love that I needed. We all know how well that works out.
Yeah, that's a little hard to do.
That's a tough one. Anyway, short story shorter, I just really appreciate your macrocosmic service to this whole planet in terms of really diving into every aspect of relational interaction and how to up the elegance and up the healing and up the correction and the repair. And I do believe that this the leaders, you both are in this category in my mind. The leaders of the psychotherapeutic movement are right up there with parents and teachers in terms of impacting culture and this planet and how we are with each other. So deepest bow to you both to begin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to cover a bunch of areas and then see whatever tangentials are inspiring for us to chase. But one of the things that I keep coming back to with your work together, not only are you modeling what relationality looks like when you're both in this interview together as an example or up on stage, but you're really modeling your work. And there is something about that, because there are people who've taught me over the years who maybe don't live necessarily in a very human way, don't always live by what they extol. But you both have been very inspiring for me, just watching you communicate. And so a lot of your work, I've sort of pulled out some of my greatest hits, the Four Horsemen that in some ways can predict the future or the outcome or the satisfaction level of a couple. We have criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And to this day, 2024, 25, are you both wanting to add to this? Are you wanting to take any away? Are there any of these four that really stand out as the harbinger of things to come relationally?
That's a wonderful question, particularly since we have an election coming up.
All roads lead back.
Yeah, they sure do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, what we want to underscore, or what I want to underscore, is that contempt is absolutely the worst one. And contempt includes calling somebody names or calling a people names, like rapists, putting somebody down from a position of superiority. So, it's criticism.
Better than, less than.
You betcha. But it's criticism with a touch of scorn and disgust. And unfortunately, contempt not only destroys a relationship very quickly, but it also destroys the immune system of the person listening to the contempt, which was just such a mind blower. So the number of times a partner hears contempt from the other person predicts how many infectious illnesses they're going to have in 4 years. So the more contempt, the more infectious illnesses. The immune system is really injured by contempt.
And it's really what you're speaking to speaks directly to the interconnection of physiosomatic, neurochemical, all of it cooking along at the same time, which is why I love your work so much, because you are coming at it from so many multiple angles, from the chemicals as you're describing loving someone and being in love with someone, the different hormones and the different chemicals that are at play with that. And one of the big pieces that comes into play with these chemicals is when couples have been together for a long time, and they notice that their sexual craving toward each other or their desire is waning. And I love that you created what I think you still stand by in terms of the model of the sound relationship house.
Right.
Almost like some hierarchy of needs or hierarchy of the building blocks of what creates this kind of connection that we know is possible, but don't always achieve. And if I can just go through them quickly and see if any of them stand out to chase, my sense is to even begin the inquiry and the mutual commitment to each other to heal and grow and support each other's dreams coming true, etc. That to some degree, being trauma informed in these times and personality disorder informed in these times is valuable. And I would imagine, I know that you've had names and labels for couples, master couples. I like to think that I would likely belong in your useless couples category. Depends when you catch me, depends on my hormones, depends on my work addiction. But yeah, I mean, I was giggling last night. I was like, I'll come up with a really new category with John and Julie for those of us who show up as well as we possibly can.
Not a chance, Alanis, not useless.
You're so sweet. I'm totally self-deprecating. So you were talking about in creating love maps and getting to know each other in this sound relationship house.
born from curiosity. And another thing I noticed in Western culture in general, less so than Canada. Canada's kind of known culturally, if I can crassly broad stroke it, we're just sort of known to be more of a curious culture. Whereas in America, when I moved here, it took me 6 months to speak, because in Canada, I was culturally used to people asking me a question to which I would respond. And that was how dialogue was. It was back and forth, some listening. When I moved to America, I didn't speak for 6 months because there was an element of messaging here in America, if I can be crass once again, which basically says curiosity kills cats, and curiosity is an invasion of boundaries, and it's disrespectful. It's, sort of playing upon the 70s, 80s of seen, not heard. Yet for me, one of the many portals into felt sense of connection is curiosity. And even in my own marriage and a lot of ex-partners, one of the biggest issues, maybe compounded by the fact that I'm a twin, compounded by the fact that I was raised mostly in Canada, is how to conjure this curiosity. Certainly a curiosity with other, and then ultimately an intrapersonal curiosity, so that self-knowledge can accrue, and some real intimacy, sharing self with non-judgmental other, can actually happen. But what are you noticing in a way that might assuage my Canadian terror around the idea of curiosity? Do you think it's alive and well? Do you think people are afraid of being curious? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's so important.
Yes.
And, I see, a lot of, in parties and things like that, I see people just broadcasting.
Mm.
And,
It hurts.
And in dating situations, people think their job is to be interesting,
Right.
rather than interested.
Right.
And, that curiosity is so important. And it's even important in a relationship after 37 years to stay curious about your partner.
Yes. And that quality of curiosity, is that something that you can support clients in cultivating or upping?
Totally. I think a lot of times with love maps, it's that people just don't know that they need to build a roadmap of their partner's inner world. They haven't been told that that's important. And once you tell people, that's a really important thing to make people feel loved, they have to feel known and have to feel that you're interested in them. I mean, when Bob Levinson and I started recording couples conversations and just looking at how they talked about the events of the day, it turned out that there are all these couples that communicated what Irving Goffman called away behavior, which is they're going out of their way to say, "You bore me. I'm not interested in you. I'm more interested in playing with my hair than listening to you. I'm more interested in this pen that I'm fiddling with than I'm interested in you." Whereas, the masters of relationships are so interested in their partner's day. They say, "Oh, it's fascinating. Oh, tell me more
everything."
about that.
Yeah, drag it out.
What did the baby do today? Oh, wow, that's amazing." That was so striking, that one kind of couple just totally interested in one another, and the other kind of couple, totally uninterested. We created this video. One part of the video is called Spain Without Interest, and the other part of the video is called Bread with Interest. Spain Without Interest is this couple where a woman says, "I'd like to go to Spain someday," and her husband says, "Well, I actually visited Spain, and I arrived in the middle of what I thought was a military coup, and there were soldiers with fixed bayonets, and I had to walk through them to my hotel." And she's completely uninterested. She doesn't ask a single question, and he stops talking. Bread with Interest. This couple's talking about bread, and they're totally fascinated in what they're saying about bread. Well, what was bread like when you were a kid? Yeah, it was Wonder Bread. Yeah, remember you squeeze it and it pops back up? Yeah, but now bread, this great crust.
The harder the better. Yep.
Yeah, right. And they're totally fascinated in everything they're saying. And
So what is the
difference
difference in that when you
so
see
striking? Yeah. I
What
mean,
do you think it is?
when people are interested in one another, it just life is so much more fun.
It's
I
juicy.
think that it's actually a manifestation of something else. And that something else typically could be a couple of things. One is, has there been a lot of what we call turning toward one another? And what that means is showing interest in the other person, not necessarily by asking questions, but just
Attention.
simply giving them attention. If somebody from the kitchen says, "Hey, George," and George is in the living room, does George just act as if he didn't hear it? Or does he say, "Yeah"? It can be
Hmm.
something as
So
simple as that.
responsive,
That's right.
available.
That's right. As well as when one person asks for a need to be met, does the other person try at least to meet the need or say, "I really wish I could, but I can't, but I would like to," etc. So there's turning toward. When you have that manifests as interest in the other, asking questions, more curiosity. When you have Spain without interest, like John just described, then there's withdrawal, there's distance, emotional distance, and that is shown by a lack of curiosity. The second thing is when there's a lot of criticism during conflict. And criticism, of course, hurts, right? And when somebody's hurt, they tend to either get more aggressive or withdraw. And when there's withdrawal, then they're also not going to show curiosity.
Right.
You see?
Yes.
So,
So you have your horsemen are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
right.
One of the big pieces underneath all four of these is how popular trauma awareness has become. I was teaching at Esalen years ago, and they were very upset at my use of the word trauma in the description of the workshop, and I remember using it anyway, flying in the face. But cut to 2024, here we are. Trauma, the conversation around it is ubiquitous, much more so than ever before. There's a lot of conversations that you both were having 30 years ago that people are now getting really excited about, and it's a really good
Right.
time for my mentors and colleagues and teachers, I think, because there is a pay dirt or a landing of a kind happening in 2024 that is really exciting to me to behold. So the trauma-informed element of your work, when you're teaching, coaching therapists with your model and models within, is there a big trauma-informed element to your work now, more so formally than there was even 15 years ago?
Absolutely huge, Alanis. I'm so glad you're bringing this up. I have treated very, very severe trauma since 1972. So combat vets, torture victims, rape victims, incest victims, and so on. And so you're right. There is much more understanding of trauma today and the role that it plays in relationships. So we actually built a therapy that incorporates working on trauma within the couple therapy so that the person, if one has been traumatized, the other person witnesses the pain as that person works through the trauma with the therapist.
With the partner in the room. So is it
with
less
the partner in the room? That's right.
That's really important because, there have been different schools of thought in terms of individual work, couples work, and I just believe that both are so valuable.
That's
But
right.
I'm curious, your opinions, is the tantamount sort of amount of work to be done in couplehood as some people have really passionately believed over the years, or is it a combination thereof, or is it unique to each couple in front of you?
Well, there are certain similarities. I think that if there has been incest in one partner or sexual abuse that they haven't told the other person about, and they're ashamed of, they're still in that phase where they're blaming themselves, then they need individual therapy first, then bringing in the partner. And that's been one of my specialties.
Wonderful.
Secondly, when there is trauma outside of that, where somebody may have a lot of guilt or shame about what they did during combat, it's really, really powerful to do couples therapy, period. And
including the trauma recovery
including
work.
the trauma, absolutely. Bringing up the trauma. And sometimes that's really, really hard
Mhm.
for the combat or war veteran to surface.
Yeah, the
But
slow to move fast thing.
yeah, but it's so powerful. They don't assume their partner is going to understand or have compassion for them.
Mm.
And when the partner shows it, they break down and sob. And it's so beautiful, that connection that you see between the people when that trauma surfaces.
Well, you're describing the highest form of empathy that I can imagine, which is holding space and holding someone, not always literally, but and speaking of literally holding, the distinction between touch with non-sexual touch and sexual touch. I've been really inquiring into, on a personal and macro level, into the idea of the distinction between the two and when the two shall meet. So I read so much of both your work, and then there was some speaking about how in certain Esther Perel model, the idea of distance and a little bit more more individuation. David Schnarch over the years has talked about how important individuation is, and on one hand, that makes perfect sense to me. I also know that you have both really spoken to how sexuality can be not only healed within relationship, but that the passion and the interest and the vitality of sexual eroticism and connection can stay alive within a committed monogamous relationship. And I was really excited to read what you were writing about that and speaking about that, because there's so many schools of thought about this. And I've talked with so many couples and couples who come to my workshop. I've horrified a few of them by being very much couple oriented, and I've been monogamous in all my relationships. So I'm not always that popular with the polyamorous group, although I completely
Nor are
understand.
we.
We're all going to be in the doghouse together with the polyamory team. But I would love to know your views on that, and if anything that's sort of been brought into the psychotherapeutic eroticism field that is intriguing to you, or that just portends for more healing in couplehood and in committed partnership, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that the data suggests universally that psychological safety is an emotional connection as a way of getting psychological safety is necessary, not sufficient, but necessary for eroticism to really stay alive in a relationship.
Yes.
And, rather than intimacy being the enemy of eroticism, it's really what makes
It's
it
the
work.
portal.
Right, that's right. So the largest study done on this, that led to the book, The Normal Bar, with 70,000 people in 24 countries, asked the question, how are people who say they have a great sex life different from people who say they have an awful sex life? And about a dozen things emerged from that study, and none of them had to do with what happened in the bedroom. They were
It was all
about
friendship, foreplay outside of the bedroom stuff.
was all, saying I love you every day and meaning it, kissing one another passionately for no reason at all, giving compliments, giving surprise romantic gifts, cuddling. So only 4% of the non-cuddlers said they had a great sex life.
That makes
96% of the non-cuddlers had a terrible sex life. So cuddling is good, and that releases oxytocin.
Yes.
That's the mammalian bonding
hormone.
And they had romantic dates every week, and they were affectionate even in public, and amazing. So the data supports the idea that emotional connection is necessary.
Yeah. And when you're, if and when you're in an environment where you're facilitating the interplay between non-sexual touch and sexual touch, is there any danger psychotherapeutically to having those meet, or is there power or knowledge to be found in keeping them distinct? What is your experience?
I think it depends on the individual.
Mm.
When you think about this fact, you'll get it a little bit more.
Mhm.
1 out of 4 girls by the age of 18 has been sexually abused, or at least has reported it. It's probably 1 out of 3
Yeah,
when
maybe
you look
more.
at who hasn't reported it, or even more, maybe 40%. So for those women, eroticism can be dangerous. It can feel very, very scary. And if there isn't some kind of clear indication that, okay, we're in erotic territory now, as opposed to just being cuddling, warm, affectionate, then it's very easy for that woman to be triggered. Speaking of trauma, and then to freak out, get anxious, and shut down. So, for a lot of women, it's very important to make the distinction between affection and eroticism. On the other hand, if that trauma isn't still harbored inside, then affection can lead to eroticism.
Right. It can be sort of more of a flow element to that
That's
versus
right. There's a
a hyper trigger.
conduit. It can be a conduit, right, into eroticism that can be delightful, can be wonderful, but both people have to be feeling safe for
Right.
that
The
to work.
safety is the piece. 'Cause there's a big
Mm-hmm.
I'm so intrigued by humans. I love us, I hate us, and I love us again. And I just, lately in terms of social media, there was this on all the TikTok, my personal algorithm, there were all these videos of heterosexual couples where the women were being groped and the men were saying, well, this is my way of being touchy and foreplay-ish with her, and the overarching messaging was, well, no. Groping is not romantic, so
Please
I don't know, have
don't.
you heard anyone bring that into your rooms or into the
Well,
conversation?
Emily Nagoski, who's a woman I really respect. She wrote "Come as You Are,"
Oh, yes.
the best book on sex education ever.
Wow,
She
good
went
to
to
know.
the library, and she said that most women have some prerequisites before they feel the situation is erotic.
Okay.
One is they have to feel emotionally connected with their
Well,
partner
stop there, John. I
and
mean,
safe. Yeah. And, number two, they have to feel like the situation is clearly erotic and romantic,
as opposed to
as opposed
as like
to,
children running in and out of the room.
yeah, right,
Yeah, right.
exactly. Yeah.
Not erotic.
Number three, they have to feel like there's not a whole bunch of things in a to-do list that is undone. The dog hasn't been fed.
Things haven't been done.
Yeah, that's right.
So sharing the invisible load is a lovely way of foreplaying.
That's right.
Actually,
Exactly.
I tell my husband when he's tidying up and cleaning, I'm just like, oh, somebody's gonna get something. Because
That's right.
it really is about emotional labor, physical labor, just the collaborative putting two heads together.
Exactly.
Teammanship. It's so
there's
sexy.
there's a great research finding that shows that men who vacuum get more sex.
I completely agree. This house is spotless when my husband wants them. I'll tell you that. So you have the love maps, you have the fondness and admiration expressed, which you briefly touched on, John.
Yeah.
The turning toward versus the self-protective measure of turning away. I mean, that sounds so great on paper. How do you support couples across from you turning toward when the survival strategy of fight, flight, freeze, tend and befriend, collapse, all of the amazing, miraculous ways our bodies help us shut down? What happens when someone is stuck? And I've been in this place certainly over the years where turning away is such a survival strategy. How do you slowly entice someone to turn toward that which can be equated with death or annihilation?
Wow. What a question. Well, I think one has to understand that turning toward doesn't only exist within, a huge macrocosm that can feel very dangerous. It exists in the tiniest little teeny fragments of moments. Looking out the window, seeing a boat on the river and saying, wow, look at that pretty bird or pretty boat. And the other person saying, wow, that is turning toward.
Okay.
Is that going to make you shut down? Probably not.
No.
That's all it takes.
Mhm.
That's all it takes. And the more of that, the better, you see.
That's the emotional bank account idea.
Yes.
Right.
And that there's more, maybe a better word to use, but there's more resilience in the couplehood the more love is, or the more that it's in that bank account, that emotional bank account, the
Right.
more resilient you might be with the metaphoric waves.
And, and I think there's an asymmetry because the world is a much more dangerous place for women than it is for men. And,
For women, yeah, no question.
yeah. And, the estimate is that 40% of women will have a serious encounter that will threaten their lives or their.
I think I'd get that number up.
And, it probably is low. And for men, it's 9%. That's a national probability sample. But women have this special relationship with the emotion of fear. They're the protectors of the children. Women are the ones who are really responsible biologically for their children's survival.
And so protection, which in many contexts, that's sort of considered a masculine contribution, right? The protection, yet you got your mama bear.
That's right.
Who will do anything.
You don't want to get between a mama bear and her cubs.
You do not.
She'll kill you, even if you're 4 times her size.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, women have to feel safe.
Yes. And there is, thankfully, in social media, once again, when my cultural investigation, there is a lot of talk about how to create safety for women and bringing some of this awareness to the fore. I was at a workshop that I was co-leading, and the room was asked, I think there were maybe 200 people in the room. The room was asked, hey, gentlemen, in the last year, have you feared for your life? No hands go up. Continues. In the last month, in the last week, in the last day, in the last hour, no men raise their hand. You can imagine where this is going. It flips. Right. Women last year, last month, last hour, the hands were up. So it really is, on a feminist level, very exciting to see that the safety of the woman body is even something we're talking about in the context of a melting patriarchy. So that is a very exciting thing to think that our safety as a gender is something that we're even taking into consideration, because I know what's possible when I feel safe. Mm-hmm. I think of the metaphor of the orchid, rose, beautiful flower, throw some water on it, near sun, we're all good. An orchid, there's some special considerations, but it can thrive if those considerations are taken seriously. And it just is such an incredible metaphor for me to use, not only with regards to relationship, but specifically around temperament. And you talk a lot in your work beautifully in a way that is so relieving for me as a reader. You talk about flooding, and that can, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my interpretation of that is how that can stop all of these glorious relational connective things that are possible and articulated through your work. So
exactly.
What's exciting about the idea of flooding being seriously taken into consideration is that there were years ago, even at UCLA, where I brought up the idea of temperament to be really considered in psychotherapeutic conversations. And it was kind of poo-pooed for a while, the idea of temperament. And then as Elaine Aron with the highly sensitive person, and then more and more literature out there these days on being an empath, with the theory being that 20 to 30% of people are highly sensitive temperamentally. Of the 24% are empaths, which means they on some level have access to the clair gifts, clairsentience, gustance, salience, and mediumship, etc., the non-physical capacity. So taking this into consideration inside not only trauma recovery, but couplehood has been a huge deal. So when I read all your literature about flooding, I was tearing up because, and I'm going to summarize crassly, the idea of when one, sometimes both, I imagine, but when one person in a couple is flooded, it's kind of a non-starter, right? Like how does one access the neofrontal cortex and all of these capacities when they jump offline because we're in fight, flight, freeze, and we're flooded. And by the way, I bought the oximeter?
Pulse oximeter.
Thank you. I bought one for my husband and I'm just going to keep it on 24/7. Anytime it's above 100, we're just shush. Don't take it off. But I think that's absolutely brilliant. And a lot of empathy is conjured, not only for my relationship, but also so many people around me, where the triggerability and the floodedness and the instantly over 100 element. Can you talk with me about that? I mean, just to throw in my opinion out of the gate, it's just this idea that we're all overstimulated. Not all. So many of us are overstimulated. And there's various ways and addictions to attempt to mitigate that or temper that. But if the culture is so much more overstimulated than it was, say, 20 years ago, how does that play into the couples across from you? How do you address that?
Loring Rowell shows that, when the heart rate gets above 100 beats a minute, and for athletes it's 80 beats a minute, we start secreting cortisol and adrenaline, and we start
and this goes off, right?
Right, and we can't process information, and we can't listen very well. We repeat ourselves. We're shut down.
So when we see litigators and presidential hopefuls in debates being able to, I'm just projecting on them that they're nervous as all get out. They're in some version of fight, flight, freeze, yet somehow this seems is there some super heroine secret around being able to keep this online while you're completely freaked out?
Well, the reality is you're not totally freaked out.
Oh.
So that's, people have different sensitivities, right? Just as you pointed out. And so, yes, people may be nervous, but they also may have so much self-confidence and experience with a group that they're not super nervous. They trust that they're going to do okay. They really count on themselves to do fine. And those are, typically politicians.
They're good at it, right?
Yeah, it's amazing that they can do that. But for the rest of us, when we're very, very anxious, of course, there's all the typical methods. You breathe deeply. You make sure you're getting enough air. You slow your breathing down. I know I used to have horrible stage fright. I was terrified. I mean, it took somebody in
debilitating.
The Gottman Institute to insert her foot in my back and push me out onto the stage in order for me to open my mouth. And so...
And yet here you are.
And what the heck happened? I don't know.
I'm inspired.
It's puzzling.
It's because I'm still nervous all the time. But.
Well, we also have...
Wait, I'm not done.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so I've learned some methods, for example, really focusing on somebody in the first 5 rows, 10 rows that looks interested. And then just focusing on them. That's right.
So you dialogue it up.
Yep. And then flip, your eyes around a little bit. But in terms of a relationship, we have couples where typically the person who gets flooded very easily has experienced trauma. So I always see that almost immediate flooding as an indicator that trauma exists in the room. And people aren't paying attention to it, and we need to pay attention to it and unearth it so there's more understanding of it.
And we can help build vagal tone
tell me all about that.
Of our clients so that they are more resilient and can recover more quickly from flooding.
And the polyvagal, Steve Porges vagal tone, I mean, there's various ways to increase tone. Is there a favorite way on your part that you provide or invite clients to do?
I love the biofeedback device that HeartMath has made. So I like electronics.
He likes gadgets.
Also, you are a research archetype. I think
Right.
Brene Brown and you and Julie, do you relate to the research archetype? The clickety clackety till 4 a.m. rabbit hole woman? Is that you?
Can be, for sure. But typically I'm more of an intuitive.
Okay.
So I'm intuiting a lot of stuff. I've studied shamanism for 25 years,
The
so
soulful. Yeah.
yeah, whatever. So that
I'm a numbers guy.
he's a
Yeah.
numbers guy, and I'm not. What can I say? But I love research too.
So you had turned toward, you have positive sentiment override, which to me, I think forgiveness is something that emerges post understanding. Is it true that positive sentiment overriding, generally seeing your partner through a positive lens, is that something that um, that's an effect of all the curiosities and kindnesses and compliments and gifties? Is the effect that there's a general positive sentiment override, or is it that this is something that can be imposed into a challenging situation?
I think it depends also. So you've just outlined the bottom 3 layers of our sound relationship house, which have to do with friendship. But um, if conflict is not working well, if there's those 4 horsemen galloping through the relationship during conflict, then that's also going to affect that positive sentiment override and depress it, move it more into negative sentiment override. So both systems it don't have to be perfect, but they have to be working fairly well so that people are respectful during conflicts, they're listening to one another, they're able to make compromises and accept influence from each other.
I think a part of it is also dynamic, and that is that it seems like the masters of relationships have a different habit of mind. And when they scan their social environment, they're really looking for what's going right and what they can say thank you about. Whereas the disasters have this low-level irritability, and they scan their social environment for people's mistakes. And it kind of explains their irritability. So, they don't, and it turns out, Robinson and Price did this great study in 1980, a long time ago, that showed that if you have that negative habit of mind, you miss 50% of the positive stuff your partner is doing.
Right. And with people across from you, is there a way to invite or entice the skew to shift? Because with depression and all of these anxiety, depression, biochemical, neurochemical, it can bring you into the molasses and the swamp.
So true. If one works on improving friendship more, especially more turning towards one another, and one begins to reshape, reconfigure how they deal with conflict, that automatically is going to have a influence on sentiment override that moves it towards the positive.
And there's great research by Richie Davidson at the University of Wisconsin. And what Davidson found was that there's a frontal asymmetry. So if you look at the right frontal lobe and the left frontal lobe, if the right frontal lobe is more active than the left, you tend to process things negatively. You ruminate about the bad things in your life. If there's a left frontal dominance, you think about things more optimistically, and you approach more than withdraw from the world.
And is this a genetic predisposition thing?
Well, it really seemed like it was, and it seemed like it was a fundamental temperamental difference.
Mm-hmm.
But Davidson found that by just using John Kabat-Zinn's meditation, he completely shifted the way the brain was working. And people who were depressed with right frontal asymmetry tended to withdraw from the world and ruminate on the negative, completely switched their brain pattern.
And you've written extensively, Julie, about just doing conflict well, sort of fight right. Beautiful book.
Mm-hmm.
I think so often about us in our living room, us in the world, the micro and the macro, and how they're inextricably linked and they mirror each other in so many ways. And if those of us who can't resolve is a funny word, but who can't do conflict is growth trying to happen, which I love. If we can't do conflict and we avoid it at all costs or various ways of avoiding it, then the growth and the deeper intimacy and the deeper felt sense of connection isn't as available to us. But the flooding, I think about the flooding and how overstimulating conflict can be. So I would imagine that some version of titrating, slow down to move fast. I love introducing the 30-minute break so that biochemically you can kind of get back to ground zero. Maybe some of your humor comes back online. Some of your maybe generosity of spirit opens back up. I've never fully done that. The 30 minute, we'll see you back here in 30 minutes. I've done it in couples therapy. But in terms of conflict, what would the word be that you would use? Would you use the word resolution? Would you use just conflicting well? What's the verbiage that feels right to you?
Management.
Conflict management.
Yes.
Oh, it sounds so mature.
I know. It is so mature and so cerebral. It's really ridiculous.
Yes.
Anyway, but conflict management is really what it's about, in the sense that, as you know from reading our stuff, we found that 69% of all problems that couples go through are perpetual problems. They never go away.
They don't get solved. They're unsolvable.
No, that's right. So resolvable gets thrown out the window. However, I'm thinking about the dream within conflict. That is just such a wonderful way of deepening your understanding of your partner when there is a perpetual problem. And what that involves is one person asking the other a series of 6 questions and just listening to the answers without contradicting them. And then the other asking those questions and you speaking the answers. So those questions have to do with values, ethics. They have to do with your own personal childhood history or background. What makes something so important to you in terms of the position you hold on a conflict? What's your ideal dream here? If you could fashion the world any way you wanted in terms of this conflict, what would it look like? And then we go existential. Is there some underlying purpose or sense of meaning for you, for your life, that your position on this conflict really ties into?
That feels it's being threatened or...
Yeah, that's right. So if that kind of understanding can be generated, then more compassion evolves from that. And it makes compromises much easier.
And when you say compromises, because compromise, it's been a word that I've been ambivalent at best about.
Okay.
Because when, let's say you are asking me for something and it might be some skin off my back, quote unquote, but I know that it would contribute to a version of correction or repair or healing for you. I no longer feel compromised in offering that to you. It's from this place of generosity of spirit. So I don't actually feel compromised as much as I feel intentional around what I'm foregoing in this moment, so this person can feel my participation in their healing or my participation in some correction for them. So
that's brilliant.
That might just be a verbiage semantic thing.
No, I think that's beautiful.
You spoke about it a moment ago, but the idea of really actively wanting to make sure that your partner's life dreams come true. And that is a big one right now. I've been married almost 15 years. And I see that a key piece of the vitality in our relationship keeps coming back to us peeking in to make sure that on an individual level, we have our goals as a couple, visions of what the future may look like together in terms of service and otherwise. We also have very individual goals. So leaning in and peeking in to see how the individual goals are going has been a big part of the rock of our connection. So I just wanted to bring that one up. Is there anything about that you'd want to say in this moment?
I'm loving everything that you're saying. And I think a lot of couples believe that their dreams have to line up in order for them to have a successful relationship.
Right, that makes
and
sense.
that is so not true.
It's not true, right?
No, thank goodness, a lot of us have very different dreams from one another, right? And if you truly, really want the best for your partner, and you know that that dream is fundamental to who they are and realizing their full potential, then you're going to want to honor their dream,
Yeah.
even if it's very different than yours. And when I say compromise, let me give you an example of this. There was a couple that came to one of our workshops, and they were getting ready to retire. He wanted to buy a sailboat, sail around the world, classic, right?
Classic.
Into the sunset.
Yep.
Yep. And what she wanted was to return to the farm that had been in her family for over 100 years. And where was that farm located? Iowa.
I was like,
So
not
how
on
do
the
you
sea.
sail around? No. How do
Not
you sail
near the
around
boat.
the world, right? From Iowa. It's not easy. So when they did this dream within conflict conversation and realized the importance and, again, how much they loved each other, even though their dreams were so disparate, they arrived at, I guess, what I would call a beautiful compromise, which was this. They both wanted to sell their house. They would do that. They would sail as far as they could get for 1 year. Then they would put the boat up on dry dock and they would return to the farm and live there for a year, thus honoring each other's dreams sequentially.
The win-win.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of a classic situation, but they had been arguing about that for 6 years
Oh,
with
yeah.
no resolution, you see. So that's an example of what I
Yeah. And one of the pieces that can bring this to the fore is really going big, both people really going big. And if they were just to, for me, as an example with my husband, if I go big in terms of my individual, what's the best, knowing that this best, biggest, highest vision may impact my family in a way that ultimately isn't going to work. But both of us presenting the best case scenario has been really powerful too, because then we get the full individual picture that we can work into the two-person picture. If
That's
it's possible.
right.
Not
Yeah,
always possible.
that's right. Mhm.
And you mentioned shared meaning, John, a second ago, the idea of having, and it's not so much, as you've just said, Julie, it's not so much merging your life goal or vision or dreams. It's finding a way to link them, or what's a good way to say it? It's finding a good way to have your partner's dream be as important as your own personal one.
Honor it.
Honoring. Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Are you noticing any big differences in hetero couples versus gay couples with regards to conflict or challenges?
We've done some systematic research on that.
I
And
can imagine. Like, tell me everything.
well, it looks like things are a lot better for gay and lesbian couples
That's what I've
than
heard.
they are for heterosexuals. There's not that power dynamic as much, and they're less defensive. They're gentler in the way they present uh, their points of view, and they have more of a sense of humor about one another. Than you don't have that dynamic of power, and it makes it really pretty different.
Can you speak to what that power dynamic is? As soon as it's male female, what happens there? Is it just the classic gender wars conversation, or what is
Yeah,
why is it easier?
it's only really recently that women have emerged from centuries of domination and being treated as property.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the 1920s where it became illegal to beat your wife.
Mm.
In many of the states, and women got the right to vote in Switzerland in 1960. That's pretty recent.
It's so silly. That's
and
yesterday.
And it's still, and here the Taliban in Afghanistan are, preventing women from getting an education. It's horrible. And
Yeah.
so
I'm
women
trying to
are
show
emerging.
yeah,
they're
I mean, my
emerging from
son.
generations of slavery, really. And so, any man who honors his wife's dreams is
Is a
way
real
ahead
man.
of the game. Yeah, he's a real man, and and he's smart.
Well, yeah, and there's a little bit of a movement in my social media algorithms. This whole idea of really orienting men, because on some level, if I can be so audacious as to say, in the feminist movement, I feel a lot of women are emboldened. One of the answers to fit into a patriarchal male gaze context was to become more masculinized as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So through this journey, and it's much longer than this little focus that I'm focusing in on, but this idea that women cultivated their masculinity, for lack of a better term, in order to become more whole. And then there's an invitation inherent in this feminist movement to the male body. There's an invitation. And because I'm not a man, turning to you in this moment, John, and just saying, what both of you, but John as a man body, what are you noticing? Is there any kind of melting going on, or a reframing? Or if you can just generalize your thoughts.
I think an enormous change occurred in 1960
Okay.
when the first man handcuffed himself to his wife when she went into labor. And now that men are seeing their babies born, there's a new awe and respect that men have gained for women. And when you see your kid born, it changes the way you feel about what women are.
What women are capable of. And it's childbirth is
right.
one of them, but so many others, the capacities.
Yeah. And as dads have become more involved with their children, I know, being the father of a daughter made me the most ardent feminist imaginable, because nobody was going to stop my daughter from being everything she could be. That's it.
I think you made a smart decision in your marriage there too. So good.
I also want to say that, I think men are really changing. The reality is that typically men were allowed to express anger and nothing else. That was
right. All emotions were filtered through anger.
That's right. And
Yeah.
women could express all the vulnerable emotions like sadness and grief and fear and so on, but they couldn't express anger. They'd be called the B word if they expressed anger.
Still. Yeah.
Still, that's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's changing. It's changing. It's
no
changing.
Question.
Right? Through sisterhood, basically, women are really embracing their right to express anger, which has to do with injustice or feeling blocked.
If you're paying attention, you're angry.
Yeah. Yeah, no joke.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I think men are also slowly beginning to feel more free to express other emotions.
Yes.
Especially, with the latest stuff that's coming out on the brain, and that all the emotions are hardwired into all of us, not just
all
one
brains.
gender, right? Or the other. And that they can be respected as men, in fact, very courageous men, if they express those vulnerable emotions, because it's very scary to do that. And they're doing it anyway. So it's so beautiful.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's such a portal again into intimacy.
That's
there's something
right.
about when a man is being vulnerable across from me that everything opens.
That's very, right. It's gorgeous.
Being able to put feelings into words, all these evidences of developmental maturation, like being able to put feelings into words, even know what these feelings are. I love your list that you both anger, sadness, disgust, contempt, fear, interest, and happiness. I know those are the main ones that you go back to as the main types, and all the others are subtypes. Is that kind of the general list?
But let me say one thing about the Sound Relationship House. None of it works without trust and commitment.
Yes. So the trust
that
piece
has
is
to
a
be
big
there.
one. Yes.
And if those aren't there, none of these little tricks like turning toward bids or having
they're mechanical at that point, right?
They're mechanical,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So the trust piece is huge, and this is the note that I'm excited to end our conversation today on. So there was a study that you shared In Brazil, 2% of people trust, and in Norwegia, the Norwegian people, 65% of people trust.
That's right.
And there have been some incredible studies that you've done just sociologically, economically, psychologically, politically, philosophically, all around the idea of trust. And it's so robust, your work. I can't recommend it enough. So is there an element of cultivating trust? I mean, I think back to my childhood and I think back to messages that I got very early on about how stupid it was to trust. And that stupid people trusted and weak people trusted. And, there were some messages that were just not true that I took in as a young person. I hadn't grown developmentally to the point where I was discerning enough. I also was very, very open and very naive in a lot of ways. And I was a perfect magnet for personality disorders to be magnetized toward me. So in terms of trust, I have every reason to not trust. And of course, there's a part of me that doesn't trust less than the 2%. And then there's this part of me that is always willing to trust. There have been, one-liners around, trust is something that's earned over time. Is trust something that you believe is just ultimately earned over time based on repeated, consistent behaviors that connote and provide safety and attunement? Because the attunement is a big word, so connected with attachment and safety and development unfolding as opposed to being thwarted. So either of you, I would love to hear any thoughts on how to cultivate trust in a world that is normalizing personality disorders and even the idea of discernment. It's like, how do you discuss?
Trust is both people thinking for two instead of thinking for one. And so that even if I'm alone, Julie's right here, right by my side.
Internalized.
Yes. And, and if I'm making any kind of decision, even really small ones, I'm really thinking of her.
Of the impact.
I'm not really alone. I'm really thinking of her welfare and not just my own. That's a precious thing.
It really is.
When you talked about developing trust, I definitely believe that it does take time to develop trust. None of us grows up in a perfect world. We all get hurt one way or another, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some people will respond to all that hurt by over trusting, right?
Yeah,
with no discernment. Yep,
Mm-hmm.
me too.
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite. You're paranoid. Nobody is trustworthy, and that leaves you isolated and alone. But, you can start, everybody starts with these little bitty tests. If you say you're going to call me, do you do it?
Right.
If you say that you're going to pick me up, in your car, do you do it? Do you call me if you're late coming home from work, or do you just ignore the impact of that on me? There's all these little tiny things that begin to add up to trust. And finally, will you be there for me? That is the essential question within trust. When I'm sick, when I'm depressed, when I want to celebrate, when I'm victorious and want to, just celebrate that. When I'm exhausted, stressed, are you there for me? Right. Nobody will be perfectly. No question about that.
Right. And you're describing an attachment figure, and this is kind of related to how do you keep eroticism alive in a relationship. Am I correct in interpreting that you both believe that having this kind of availability attachment-wise, consciously becoming an attachment figure for your partner is a thumbs up thing? That's a very positive thing in order to... Okay.
And all the research shows that. And the folks who think that distance creates more eroticism, it's not true.
Well, the stranger danger thing is its own conversation. It's connected to the pornography conversation, impersonal sex. Why is that so hot? All of that.
Exactly.
And would you consider that to be in its own category? Like, what would you say to the idea of stranger it's its own category, right? The impersonal.
Sort of is its own category. Yeah, and it. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a good way to look at it.
It leaves you physically satisfied. All the right nerve endings have been stimulated.
Yes, all the biochemical
Goody.
is cooking along.
Goody.
Right.
But how are you emotionally? How
Right.
are you in your heart? Do you feel connected to the other person, or do you feel alone?
Yeah,
It's a
I
fundamental question.
I think one of the most interesting findings that I've heard in this area is the thing called the girlfriend experience, where high-priced call girls say that the fantasy that their male customers want the most is for them to pretend that they love them.
Oh,
Isn't that sad?
that breaks my
Yeah.
heart.
God. Yeah.
Because there is no sex that's comparable to sex that has love in it. With
No.
somebody you love and somebody who loves
Yeah.
you, it just doesn't compare.
And do all roads lead back to this attachment hunger? Because I was investigating the idea of erotic transference in psychotherapy in therapy,
Mhm.
and there were some findings that basically said all of this is attachment hunger.
Mhm.
Attachment is a great word. But what I correlate it with is that we are all pack animals.
Hmm.
That's what we are.
Nice, I love that.
We are pack animals from the beginning of time, and we depend on each other. We depend on that connection for our very survival, and that is bred into our bones over the millennia. So, what does that mean? That means we have to depend on each other. We have to trust each other. We have to count on each other. We come back to that feeling of trust.
Yes, yes.
And that is, again, intrinsic to our very animal nature of who we are. You can call that attachment if you want.
Mm-hmm. Well,
You can
connection,
call- Connection. Yeah, that's right. You can also, when it goes even deeper than that and there is commitment, there's love.
Mm.
And
Well,
what's better than that?
there is nothing. Not sure we can go higher than that. Yeah.
And also think about that the people who always feel insecurely attached, who really don't feel they can trust anybody, they feel more comfortable having a relationship in the wings.
Right.
That if
Yeah.
if this one fails, that there's another one to go to.
Right.
know,
And the
there
impersonal
is-
is actually lovely because it's less,
That's
I
right.
mean, it's everything. It's
Vulnerable.
less stimulating. It's less vulnerable. Yeah.
Right.
Less
Exactly.
risk.
Yeah.
Wow-wee. I'm sweating. It's a good thing. John, you had mentioned feelings, perception, and physiology. What was that in regards to? That was in regards to trust?
Really,
Well,
those are our measurement
They're
domains.
research. They're part of our research.
Yeah.
I pulled that out because it was significant. I'm completely forgetting why, but it was feelings, perception, and physiology were considerations inside of the trust conversation.
Yeah, I think they are. And part of what happens when you do establish trust, and you can trust this person to really tell you what they feel, to tell you the truth, to be honest with you, is that physiology really does respond. It doesn't go into fight and flight, right? And your perception really is that you can open up, that you can be vulnerable, that it's safe. And then the relationship goes into very new places perceptually.
Isn't he beautiful?
I have to say, you're both beautiful.
He is so beautiful. I
Oh.
love what you
Oh,
just
thank
said.
you.
That was
Okay.
gorgeous.
Yum, yum.
Alanis,
Thank you
are
both so much.
You are so articulate.
Oh, wow.
God.
I feel like
I
I'm very
just-
curious and I find the words to help my
Brilliant.
curiosity.
I can't believe how brilliant you are
Yes, you
in
can
putting
believe
things
it.
together. It really is. I mean, your music, suggests that. I mean,
We just went to your concert.
Oh, you did?
yeah.
Oh my God, you too. Yeah, I've been dying to speak with you both. I just, I'm so happy that we have had this time together, and I just feel like it's, your work, both of your work is it's the greatest rabbit hole of all time, and I highly recommend anyone listening to just go in, and you may never come out.
But the bad queen is not down there. It's okay. You won't get your head cut off.
Right.
Oh,
It's safe. Yeah.
The bad queen is in every relationship.
And we also know the
No.
bad queen is just trying to protect something, right? If we can get to the
Right.
bottom of what she's
Right.
trying to protect.
That's so true.
But I just appreciate both your brains and your souls and your archetypal, intuitive researching, and your commitment to supporting couples. I'll get all teared up talking about it, but there's something about you, both your collective mission together in this world that is really deeply moving to me. And I thank you both for being alive and for continuing to express yourselves. I love you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I feel that way about you too.
Yep, I
Thanks,
do
Thank you
too,
for being
Alanis.
alive.
Thanks,
Your
Julie.
artistry and your music puts all of us more deeply in touch with our souls,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
With
amen.
our souls. And from there, we can connect at a much deeper level with whoever is around us. So thank you for that.
You're showing us the truth.
Yep,
Mhm.
that's what the role
Thank
of
you for-
artists is.
It is to evidence and invite the mirror neurons,
Yep.
I feel the feelings, and on stage anyway, I don't have shame about them. So it's this invitation and truly an energetic dialogue at its best. But thank you for sharing your wisdom and insight and findings and study yields so generously with me. And I love you both. And I'm just really
Oh,
happy you're
Thank
on this
you.
planet.
Thank you.
So
We love
Thank
you too.
you, thank you, thank
yeah,
you.
to be continued.
Keep talking and
Yes.
singing and writing.
Yeah, always.
Yes.
Always.
Please.
Till
Please.
death and beyond. You too. All right. Well, bless you. Thank you both so much for your time and all your energy.